One of you was asking about how much I said about the Greek gods being on the test. Well, I've been spending the last 2 days making up the test. You'll only see 1 or 2 questions about the gods the most. But do know, who the chief of the gods was, Zeus. Do know that the Greek place where the dead went, they call it Hades. And the other about Mars being the patron god of Sparta. Basically the stuff I put on the board. But don't worry about Poseidon, Neptune, Hera, Juno, Saturn, Mercury. That story I told you about Mercury's clash with his brother Apollo, that will not be on the test. But they're just the basic stuff. All right. And before I start, anybody have any questions? Okay. Something I've left out is the sophists. A lot of the sophists said there are no absolutes. Well, some years back, I had a pupil tell me there are no absolutes, and I just simply listened. I didn't argue with him. What is wrong with this statement right here? If there are no absolutes, there's something intrinsically, inherently, it has to be in error about it. If there are no absolutes, and this statement itself is not an absolute, if I think about it, there are no absolutes. That means if there are no absolutes within the context of there are no absolutes, that means obviously this is an absolute. This is an absolute, therefore there are absolutes. It's inherently, intrinsically, it's what's called an oxymoron. An oxymoron, a truthful liar, a sinful saint, an honest thief cannot be. Now, there was a movie that came out about a year or 2 ago entitled God's Not Dead. I asked the other class, how many of you, did any of you see it? Nobody in this class? Okay, I did. And it dealt with this very issue. And one of the men in the movie was Stephen Hawking. I mean, he's mentioned, he's not in the movie, he's mentioned in the movie. Stephen Hawking is making this kind of a statement that there are no more absolutes. Well, since the movie was made, just within the past few weeks, Stephen Hawking has come out and said that he now believes in God. He said, I'm not a Christian, but they said the universe is put together too well for it to just happen by chance. And he now says that he believes. One of the more shocking statements coming from academia since C.S. Lewis, some 60 years ago, declared, I'm a Christian. Because generally the high-up people in academia pride themselves on abandoning all religion. And when one of them comes out and says, I'm converted, it does somewhat shake up the academic world. Anyway, there are no absolutes. That means that statement is either an absolute or it isn't. All right. The Greeks, by the way, argued the same thing. One of the things the Greeks argued was some of them said there must be a God because there's too much order appears in the universe. Other Greeks said, no, there's too much chaos in the universe. No orderly God could have created this much chaos. And they argued these issues themselves, back and forth. Anyway, back to the lesson. Plato. Plato set forth his ideas on how the government should be in his book, The Republic. And I want to say this about government. Every attempt man has made at government has sooner or later come to an end, sooner or later failed. But Plato believed in the Republic. In other words, not a democracy. Plato had a low idea of democracy, but especially after democracy condemned Socrates to death. But a republic is where a few of the best people, representatives, represent you. Our American system is more of a republic than it is a democracy, in that the laws are actually made by Congress or by legislatures, or in some cases handed down by the Supreme Court, which was not what our founding fathers intended, but nevertheless, they do make the laws. for good or bad. But laws are made by, generally by legislative action, where that a few people get together and make the laws. That's the difference between a republic and a republic. You get representatives together, and they decide on the course the country is to take. In a democracy, the assembly meets, the whole assembly, and the whole assembly together decides. Now, in Plato's idea of a republic, only the few would have any say-so in government. He did not believe that everybody should participate in government, but only the enlightened, the better educated, the more successful. And our founding fathers, the American founding fathers, when they set up the Constitution, initially only property owners could vote. And this has since been changed, drastically changed, but only property owning men were allowed to vote. Men who were too poor to own property were considered unfit to vote or to hold office. I mean, folks, this was the original intent of our government. It was based more on Plato than it was on real democracy. Plato also believed that women, and this is somewhere Plato was different from the other Greeks. The Greeks in general looked down on women as being inferior. This is especially true of Aristotle, who really believed that women were very much inferior. Said a woman's place was, or the Greeks said a woman's place was in a home. Plato believed that women could actually play a role in government, and that women could, he also believed that women could associate with men as equals. And from this we get the term Platonic, where that men and women associate with each other. Again, you see the name Plato here, Platonic. Men and women associate with each other as friends without becoming lovers. Again, this term, this idea comes from him, or he's credited with it. He classified people into three classes. Don't write this down, but he believed that the really good people were the philosopher kings, the upper classes, the philosophers and the kings. Then there was the warrior class, or the courageous ones. And finally, at the very bottom were the producers, and he looked down to the producers being the masses. And this reminds me a lot of Karl Marx, that the ordinary people are just mass people. I'd like people to take him by the hand and say, hey, Plato, come here to the United States. The United States was made up of outcasts from other continents. Europe's outcast, Asia's outcast, Africa's outcast. Get a bunch of outcasts together, and they can outdo the old world, the old ways. And I believe your poor people too, if you got the right kind of opportunities, could outdo the aristocracy. Again, keep in mind, in his day, only the aristocracy were educated, and the poor were not. And there was a big gap then between the learning of the rich and of the poor. All right. Next is Aristotle. There's a famous painting that shows Plato and Aristotle engage in argument. Plato is walking along beside Aristotle, and Aristotle has his right hand toward heaven, saying this is where the solution is, up here. And Aristotle has his left hand pointing toward the earth, saying, no, the solution to our problems is down here. Aristotle rejected Plato's concept of an ideal world, he said that no, the real world is the world of our senses. There is no idealism. So he was more scientific. And as far as government goes, Aristotle believed that the real form of government was the best form of government was the monarchy. He had little use for a republic, little use for any form of democracy. He said that the monarchy really was best. And again, keep in mind that these people were influenced by what they saw with the chaos that was associated with Athenian democracy. But actually, Socrates did not like Athenian democracy either because of the chaos. Now, I think I'm going to mention again, Socrates taught Plato. Plato taught Aristotle, and Aristotle taught Alexander the Great. Aristotle was brought up in Plato's school called the Academy. And to this day, the word academy is used, and it means private school. In other words, a private school is a school where the school gets to pick and choose its students, rather than have to take in anybody. West Point is the most famous academy in the United States. At West Point, they get to pick and choose who comes in and who doesn't. Military academy, otherwise known as a private school, or a school that is not open to everybody. So Aristotle was one of Plato's many pupils, disciples you might call them. These men would surround themselves with men whom they teach, called disciples, similar to what Jesus was to do a few hundred years later. All right, now, Aristotle is famous for writing a lot of scientific works, and his science has come down to us. Fortunately for him, when he died, his works were put in somebody's basement, a dry basement, and forgotten about for about 200 years. In 200 years, there's somebody happened to be going through some old books and came across one, was really impressed by the learning, and Aristotle then was to be popular for the next 2,000 or so years. Now we're going to run into Aristotle's name again, because in the Middle Ages, the schoolmen of the Middle Ages fell madly in love with him and looked on him as being their guide. So, in the field of science, he classified animals. Now, taxonomy. This classification of animals is known as the science of taxonomy. Aristotle classified animals based on their habits. Now today we try to classify animals based on what we think was their common ancestry. In other words, if this species had a common ancestry with this, and we try to class them in the same family with the same order. And in actual reality, there's not one case where we can prove that one order of animals descended from another, or that one family of animals descended from another. Not in any case, but nevertheless we do. So what I'm getting to is Aristotle classified bats along with birds. Bats and birds were classed in the same class because both of them fly. He classified animals as to whether the ones that gave live birth or the ones that laid eggs. Well, here's the problem with that. Some fish, particularly most notably the guppy, bears its young live and does not lay eggs. Any of you familiar with guppies? They're warm water aquarium fish that you might find in pet stores. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but anyway, they bear their young live. They don't lay eggs. Now also, there are at least two types of mammals, the monotreme and the duckbill, warm-blooded mammals that lay eggs. The science of taxonomy, the more we learn about it, and by the way, we are discovering new species of mammals regularly as we get into places like New Guinea, Papua New Guinea, and deep into the rainforest and deep into the oceans and exploring oceans that we've never seen. Classifying becomes a real trick. And we wind up simply, in some cases, not knowing where to put certain animals. We're finding that there are, or at least were, snakes with eggs, with legs, snakes that once had legs. We also are finding that at one time some birds had teeth. Today, no living bird has teeth, but at one time birds had teeth. And again, some fish lay eggs and some don't. Some reptiles lay eggs and some don't. We're finding that there were once reptiles that flew. They once were called pterodactyls, flying reptiles. And so taxonomy becomes a science that you just simply have to come to grips with. No matter what rule you lay down, there are exceptions. And when it comes to classifying certain types of fish, taxonomists will admit they sometimes just arbitrarily put this kind of fish over this classification simply because there's no other place to put it. And not that it belongs there. So anyway, now, he based more on habits than characteristics. He observed the stars and came to the conclusion the earth was round. And here's why. He said if the earth were flat, and you looked at the North Star, particularly the North Star known as Polaris, He said if the earth were flat, the North Star would not look the same way it does since the earth is round. And he noticed that when you get close to the equator here, the North Star gets lower and lower in the sky, then gets south of the equator, you can't see the North Star anymore. So here's the equator. It gets to get right here and the North Star becomes completely invisible. But also the angle. At this point, the angle is this, and at this point the angle is much sharper. He said this would not be the case if the earth were flat. So by observing the stars and the angles of the stars, he came to the conclusion the earth was round. Of course, he was far from the first person to do so. Now, however, he made some really, really serious blunders. One of his blunders that made him really look ridiculous to later generations, he observed that a feather falls slowly and a rock falls faster than a feather. So he concluded that lighter objects fall more slowly than heavy objects. Do any of you studied enough physics to know the fallacy of this logic? Supposedly Galileo went to the Leaning Tower of Pisa one time to prove him wrong and dropped at the same time a 100-pound cannon shot, and a half a pound cannon shot, and a 100-pound lead weight. Dropped them both, and they both landed at the same time. In fact, this experiment, they actually went to the moon. After the astronauts went to the moon, one of them carried a feather with him. He held up a feather in his one hand, the moon rock in the other, and dropped them both on the moon's light gravity, and they both landed at the same time. In a vacuum, a feather falls like a rock. The only reason the feather falls more slowly is the air moves it up. Aristotle did not realize this. A really obvious blunder that he would have caught on to had he done a little bit more experimentation. And he made himself look ridiculous later. Now, he did not believe that money could be invested to make more money. Well, both down the drain then goes our whole banking system. Without banks, I think I mentioned this before, without banks, most of us would never be able to afford an automobile, never be able to afford our house. Most of us will get our house based on if we buy one, we'll take out a 30-year loan or even a 15-year loan and mortgage our house that way and eventually pay it off. Same with the car. Most of us to buy a car will go to a loan company first and get a loan and then go to the car dealership and buy our car based on a bank loan and pay interest. The banks make their money by charging interest. Again, also most of us will try at some point to invest our money in something speculative like the stock market in hopes that our money will get bigger in value as time goes on. Now, the last 3 or 4 weeks have made a liar out of that. But the stock market, while it does go up and down, in general, during most of my lifetime, the overall has been a rise. But Aristotle's idea was out the window goes our whole investment system. And with our whole investment system, down a drain goes our whole economic system. But again, maybe you can overlook him. But he set, in some ways, he set mankind back hundreds of years. Now, he did not believe in the atom. Some Greeks were teaching, particularly I believe a Greek man named Demosthenes, that you break any material down, you get to where it's so small you can't see it, but if you could break it down farther, it would break down and become the smallest unit you could get, called the atom. Aristotle said if the air were made of atoms, the air would fall to the earth like a shower of pebbles. But he was right. Gravity does, in fact, hold the Earth's atmosphere in place. But he was also the air is now believed to be made of atoms. Now, the point I'm making, Aristotle, all right, between these three men, all right, folks, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, all right, I think that they actually destroyed everything they touched without meaning to. What happened? Socrates was elevated almost to the status of a god, and so was Plato, and so was Aristotle later. After Alexander passed on, the Hellenistic world came on. Well, basically, the Hellenistic world collapsed. The Roman Empire adopted Socrates and Plato's ideas, and it collapsed. And ultimately, these three men did more than their share to propel Western Europeans into a period of time that we call the Dark Ages. Because they were so right in so many things they said, that you just got the feeling that, hey, they're right on everything. Because they're right on this, that, and the other, so they must be right. And Aristotle especially could make some convincing claims with his science. He was so right on some of the things he said about science, and yet so wrong on some of the things he said about economics and government. Out the window went democracy, thanks in large part to these men. And out the window went our banking system for hundreds of years, actually more than 1,000 years. Europeans were reluctant to set up banks. And it wasn't until Europeans finally, at least some enterprising Europeans began to set up a banking system, then Europe began to prosper again. Banks do a lot more for us than we realize. These men set the course of European culture on a downward hill that it was going to take a long time to turn around. Now, at this time I want to digress. Albert Einstein has been called one of the smartest men who ever lived in modern times. When he died, he gave permission to take his brain out so they could examine his brain to find out which was smart. And they found out that he had more connective neurons in the frontal part of his brain than most people do, indicating that he could form more, could comprehend more deep mathematical equations than most people do and solve more mathematical problems than most people do. So he was in some ways really smart, but he also, they tell stories about his ingenuity, but some stories that are not told about him is he was caught more than once roaming frantically around his own neighborhood and finally grabs him and said, please, can you help me? My name is Albert Einstein. I can't find my house. Can you please tell me where I live? Sheer abject stupidity in the midst of genius. Do you follow my logic? That these men who have taught, okay, we asked, when I was 14 years old, we asked my science teacher, Mr. Taylor by name, is it true that half the geniuses are insane? Oh, no, he said, that's not so. The more I study the both, the more convinced I am. Half the geniuses are insane and the other half are half insane. Anybody want to comment? They make such great wise discoveries on the one hand and turn around on the other hand and make such idiot. Yes?
I was reading this, somebody was doing like a study on Einstein or something like that.
Yeah.
Basically an expert on Einstein.
Yes.
He openly admitted to doing drugs like often, not like, just like neurotic drugs, like,
Say that again, loud.
he openly admitted to doing like he smoked pot. a
Oh,
lot.
Einstein did?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I didn't know that about him.
Yeah, I didn't either, and I was like, wow.
I didn't know that. And I read a biography about him once written by his son. I didn't realize, even though I'm not surprised. Now, again, these people, though, got such an influence that it took mankind a long time to overcome some of the errors that they made. Particularly in the case of, Aristotle, again, had no use for him. Now, I wanted to talk about two aspects of the progression. I've mentioned this, I believe, once. One of the progressions concerned the era of homosexuality. Socrates believed it was wrong and tried to fight it. To Plato, who argued it was all right, to Aristotle, who didn't argue about it anymore. That was a progression. The other progression was from the spiritual to the mundane. With Socrates, to me, Socrates was one of the more spiritually minded men who ever lived. Plato was also very heavenly minded, you might say, maybe not as much as Socrates. Socrates claimed to have direct contact with the spirit world. Plato didn't, but he believed in the spirit world. To Aristotle, who had no use for the spirit world, whatever, to him all was mundane. There was a progression down, I want to call it downward, there was a progression from the spiritual to the mundane. Now this did not last. Not long after Aristotle was gone, a new generation of Greeks arose who were more spiritual perhaps than even Socrates, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. All right. Family life. Women, again, were expected to stay at home. Plato was an exception. He believed that women could carry on some functions in public. The young girls oftentimes married as young as 14 years of age, and if you think that's too young, I want you to keep in mind, the average person in those days only lived about 30 years. And it was rare that a person lived 60 or 70 years. Now, we have not extended life expectancy, folks. Every generation that we have documented has had people live to be 100. The difference is we have a higher percentage of our people living that long. We had a very famous person this morning died at 90, Yogi Berra by name. Most of you younger persons might not remember that guy, Yogi Berra. He was still playing when I was as young as most of you are, playing baseball. But they had people live to be 80. They had people live to be 90. The top age is believed by some that humanity can achieve is 120. And for all of our money, we have not exceeded that. It's like we've got this barrier at 120, and nobody is going to exceed that until we make some super duper discovery about aging. But what we're doing is with our medicine, we're getting more people getting closer and closer to that, but we are not exceeding it. But they died at a younger age, owing probably to we have better sanitation, better doctors, better medical practices. They only considered legitimate children to be citizens. Illegitimate children were not. And as I've tried to mention, particularly in the case of Socrates, the men, at least the upper classes, believed that male homosexuality was an ideal way to live. And we don't know how much this idea may have extended to the lower classes, but let's face it, if their gods were doing it, if their kings were doing it, and their philosophers were telling them it was okay, it might have been that the lower classes did a lot of this practice also. Alexander the Great. All right. Alexander was son of Philip of Macedon. Philip of Macedon was the most powerful ruler in that part of the world. The Macedonians were related to the Greeks, and they worshipped the Greek gods, but they were looked on by the Greeks as being semi-barbarian. In other words, they're not quite as good as we are, but they're not barbarian either. So they were distant cousins, distant kin to the Greeks. Macedonia was to the north and east of Greece, part of the Balkan region of Europe. Anyway, the Greeks had looked down on the Macedonians to Philip, and Philip all of a sudden built up a mighty army, and he conquered all of Greece. Now, some years ago, one of my pupils gave me a documentary which I used to show, but then somebody reminded me it's illegal to show those documentaries in a college class like this. But this documentary showed a picture of Alexander's mother, Olympia, lying in her bed, and her father, Philip of Macedon, peeked through a keyhole, and he saw a big serpent slither up to her bed, and he was very much terrified at this apparition. So he went to the Oracle of Delphi to consult. The Oracle of Delphi simply told him, honor Zeus with all your might. And number two, the eye with which you saw this serpent, you will lose the vision in that eye. And 2 years later, Philip was wounded in the eye, lost his eye in a battle. Philip always was afraid of his wife after that. And especially since his wife became pregnant shortly after that, there are rumors have always gone down through the ages that Alexander really was a son of Zeus and not a son of Philip. Again, folk, I feel like I should mention this. You can take that for what you will. While Alexander was growing up, he developed somewhat of an attachment for his mother, especially when his mother was always critical of his father, particularly since his father was unfaithful to the marriage vow. His father had numerous women and seldom had anything to do with Olympia, Alexander's mother. Alexander grew up. He helped his father conquer the Greeks. And he proved right away he was going to be a mighty general. One day when Alexander was young, his father took him to buy a horse, and there was this horse out there that looked better than any other horse, but nobody could tame him, nobody could ride him. Alexander looked at the horse and noticed, hey, this horse is afraid of its shadow. So Alexander turned the horse's face toward the sun, where he couldn't see his shadow. Then he talked to the horse gently and got on the mountain and rode him into the sunlight. And his father was so impressed, his father said, son, Macedonia is not big enough for you. You're going to have a bigger kingdom than this. And his son, of course, the father bought the horse for Alexander. This horse is named Bucephalus, and Alexander rode Bucephalus from that day until Bucephalus died, not too long before Alexander did. And Alexander named one of the cities he named Bucephala, and that city is still around to this day. Alexander claimed he was descended from Hercules. He also tried to imitate Achilles. He would sleep at night with a copy of the Iliad and Odyssey under his pillow, or actually, you might say, he used the Iliad and Odyssey as his pillow, or sometimes he put the book under his pillow. He was tutored by Aristotle, personal tutor. Aristotle called Philip called Aristotle up from Athens to tutor him because Aristotle was probably the best teacher in the world. Well, Philip, after having conquered Greece, began to plan to invade Persia and take over Persia. But at a drunken party, Philip was assassinated. The assassin was killed. We cannot prove that Alexander had a part in his father's death. From that day to this, he has been suspected of it or accused of it. We do not know that he had any part in it, whatever, even though Alexander and his father did not always get along. The Greeks thought, this 20-year-old can't handle the army. He's not as good as his father. The Greeks did not know they were taking on a man who was to become the most famous military leader of all time. Anyway, the Greeks immediately rebelled against Alexander. Alexander moved and crushed the Greek city-states with a ferocity that didn't quit. And he took the city of Thebes and said, I'm going to make an example of Thebes, and killed every man in Thebes and burnt the city of Thebes with fire, to where Thebes has not been rebuilt since. And the other city-states simply lined up. No more problem out of any of them. All right, Alexander then collected an army that included Greeks and Persians, Greeks and Macedonians. He crossed into Asia Minor. There the Persian king was ready for him. The Persian king had heard he was coming, King Darius. This is not the same Darius. This is a few generations later, not the same Darius who had invaded before. Now, I had a Persian student in my class a few years back who said that really Darius III was the second greatest military commander of all time. He just happened to be opposed by the greatest military commander of all time. But really, Darius III was quite a capable military commander. But anyway, Darius III proved to be no match for Alexander. Alexander went on to conquer Asia Minor from the Persians. Then he went down from Turkey, he went down the coast of Tyre, and he conquered the city of Tyre. The city of Tyre somewhat deserved it. When Alexander sent an embassy to Tyre to negotiate a peaceful turnover to him, the Tyrians did the unthinkable. They killed Alexander's ambassadors, which is something that generally you don't do. But they killed Alexander's ambassadors because Tyre felt like that they're a mile out in the ocean, their city was safe. Well, Alexander simply had his engineers construct a causeway the whole mile distance all the way out to Tyre, and then got siege rams and battering rams to hit the city walls, conquer the city, destroyed it, and from that day till this, Tyre has never been rebuilt. Tyre thought it was invincible. Then after he'd conquered Tyre, he went through Judea, and he told the people he conquered that they must worship him. Well, when he went to Judea, the Jews simply said, no, we cannot worship you. And he said, well, I'll force you to. But a bunch of Jewish rabbis met him, and they met him with one of their sacred writings. They opened up the prophet Daniel. And they said, now this writing that was written 300 years ago tells us that you are going to conquer the king of Persia. Alexander was so impressed with the Jews that he simply said, okay, I'll exempt you from worshiping me. And the Jews said, let us assure you, we believe that you're going to conquer Persia. We are loyal to you. We're not going to rebel against you. We don't want to fight you. But we cannot worship you either, because we don't worship any god but our own. But we believe that you are destined to conquer the Persians. Alexander again exempted them. So he and the Jews made peace. He went on through Judea and went into Egypt, and he conquered Egypt. While he was in Egypt, he took the title of Pharaoh. He built the city of Alexandria, which was to become an important city, because the Egyptians had left the delta region of the Nile alone, believing that the delta region was inferior. They had allowed the Jews to live there when the Jews lived in Egypt, but they didn't consider it important. Well, Alexander, hey, this region, the delta, this is could become a great trading center, and it did. It eventually became the third greatest city in the empire, the Roman Empire. But he built the city of Alexandria. Then while there, he also went in the deep in the desert to visit an oracle in Egypt. He didn't want to trust the oracle of Delphi. The oracle in Egypt, he asked him two questions. Is everyone who killed my father dead? Number one, and number two, who is really my father? Well, the oracle gave him a straight answer and said, everybody who killed Philip of Macedon is dead. So you don't have to worry about any assassin of Philip. And he said, but you don't have to worry about Philip. Philip is not your father anyway. Zeus is your father. So Alexander took the title of Zeus Antipater, which he continued to use the rest of his life. He went back through Judea and encountered the Persians at a place called Megiddo. Now, I was there one time back 30.5 years ago. Another name for it is Armageddon. Megiddo is a pass, and it's been said Megiddo is worth 1,000 cities. The thing about it is, it's designed in such a way that when armies clash, there have been many a battle fought there already. When armies clash, there's no room for flanking movements. Supposedly, every soldier can see every other soldier because of the shape of the valley. And there's certain places where it's like a stadium. And the commanding officers then, who get on a strategic location, can see every bit of their armies. But again, there's no room for flanking. It's just the armies meet head on, and the one side wins, the other side doesn't. Now, by the way, the writer of the book of Revelation says the last battle of the world will be fought here at this place. Alexander arranged a battle where he had his army face with his back going toward Persia, and the Persians then, if they had to retreat, they would retreat toward Macedonia. In other words, he had the armies arranged backwards. If Alexander told you, if you retreat, you're going to retreat into Persian territory where you'll probably be annihilated. You can't retreat. The Persians were told, if you retreat, you retreat towards that territory that Alexander has taken, and you'll probably be annihilated there. So he arranged the armies, you might say, backwards, and he met the Persian king head on, and he won. In fact, Alexander is one of the few men who has the distinction of being able to brag that he never lost a battle. Well, he began to personally pursue King Darius. King Darius was able to outrun him for a time, but finally his own men got tired of him, and Darius was killed by one of his own men. In my readings about it, I sometimes used to find myself in sympathy with Darius, having no way he could escape Alexander, until I read a part about when Darius once asked for an advisor, said, what can I do to take on Alexander? The advisor said, what you ought to do, instead of using your own citizens, is hire mercenaries, hire the best professional soldiers in the world, hire them over and pay them half your treasury. when Alexander heard this news, he hacked this advisor to pieces. And I'm thinking, well, okay, then Darius, you got what you deserve. The advisor told you what you should have done. Hire the best of troops you can find, and maybe they can win a victory for you, and pay them half of your wealth. Maybe it would have worked. Well, Alexander, having the king of Persia out of his way then, he went on into India. He even went on beyond the world the Greek geographers had ever known before. In India, he won a few battles. But one in the battle, something happened to him that never happened to him before. He was wounded by an Indian arrow, and it almost killed him. While he was still flat on his back, still wanting to go farther, his troops told him, from the generals to the privates, "We're not going to march any farther. We are going home." It was said that Alexander, he did not have one trooper on his side, and even he had to turn back at that point. It was said that he wept because there were no more worlds to conquer. He started on a trip home, went through the desert, still wounded, got to the city of Babylon, and died. We're not quite sure of his death. I mean, he died at the age of 32, and this is a bit of trivia, folk. I'll throw in. He died on June 10th, which by coincidence happens to be my birthday. Otherwise, nothing significant about it, but throw that in at this point. June 10th. Alexander died on that day. He had ruled for 12 years. He did marry a Persian woman once, and by her he had a son, but he really had no interest in paternity, and his son was killed. When he died, his empire was divided among his 4 generals. One of the generals got Egypt, one of the generals got Syria, another one went back to Macedonia, and another one got Persia. But what he set up, though, what he was responsible for, setting up a new world called the Hellenistic world, which is based on Greek. In other words, everywhere he went, he tried to spread Greek culture, which he believed superior to other forms of culture, and Greek literature. So he tried to Hellenize, or in other words, the Greeks are also called Hellenes. He tried to Hellenize the people he conquered. And but in turn, though, the Greeks learned the East, and so there was a mix of cultures, Eastern and West. All right. Now, the Hellenistic world is famous for its philosophies. Among the philosophies were Epicurean. The Epicureans, they said, well, yeah, the gods exist, but they don't play an active role in the world. It's up to us. I mean, everything's up to us. So don't worry about the gods. They don't matter. But they believed that the highest goal in life was pleasure. A famous saying, and by the way, this saying was quoted by the Apostle Paul, "Let us eat, drink, and make merry, for tomorrow we die." In other words, the best thing you can do with your life while you're here is enjoy it to the fullest. And when you're dead, you're gone, and that's it. Let us eat, drink, and make merry, for tomorrow we die. The highest goal in life was the more pleasure you could get out of it. But now, they were not the most popular. The most popular people, the philosophies were the Stoics. The Stoics, they believed that the greatest good that you could do was to accumulate. Try to make yourself more and more wealthy. And they also believed that the better morally you were, they strove for high morality. They said the better that you were morally, the more chances you had of accumulating wealth or getting a high position in life. They said that we should try to know the will of God as best as we can understand it. Accept whatever life offers you, though, as being the will of God. Suppose you develop a crippling disease and become a cripple for life. Well, don't complain. You know, it's the saying, be stoic. You know, whatever happens to you, accept. Pericles was a prime example of stoic who believed that he should maintain a stiff upper lip. In other words, never cry, never show emotion. Whatever happened to you, accept that as being somehow God's will. The Stoics, so did have a few problems. Oh yeah, the Stoics also said that all persons, a slave to the king, were on a level of the soul were equal, something that Buddha might have agreed with. And again, folks, we don't know how much contact that Greece might have had with China. We do know the Silk Road, and we don't believe that any Chinese person actually ever visited Greece. We don't believe any Greek person ever actually visited China. But the ideas might have traveled as the goods traveled. And how many of these ideas traveled from China to Greece, from Greece to China, we don't know. But he believed that, the Stoics believed that on the level of the soul, everybody was equal. Stoics believed that you should become involved in politics. And one thing I think of when I think of Stoics is the original Spock in the Star Trek movies, Leonard Nimoy, who died recently. Don't ever show emotion under any circumstances. Now later he changed that role, but he was a typical Stoic. Always keep a straight face, unemotional. They also believed that you should have few friends because friends might hurt you. Or friends will take advantage of. Sooner or later, a friend is going to say, hey, because I've been your friend, could you help me get this position or get this job? Something that friends might do for you. Most of your wealthy people, most of your politicians, most of your community leaders in the ancient Greek world, the ancient Hellenistic world were Stoic. Well, the Greeks came into contact with Persians and Egyptians, and as they did so, the interest in the Greek gods began to decline. And they became more interested in particularly the worship of the Egyptian goddesses. Your book pronounces that Isis. And again, folk, just in the last couple of years, that name has really come to the forefront. I mean, when I taught this class 15 years ago, nobody had even heard of Isis. Today, I can pretty well guarantee all of you have, but not maybe in this context. But they eventually formed a religion that included a little bit of their own Greek religion, the Egyptian and Persian religions mixed into what we call the mystery religions. Now, there's some controversy about these mystery religions. Some people believe that they did a lot to start Christianity, give Christianity a kickstart, and they were a lot like Christianity. In the mystery religions, there was a Savior God who died, and as a result of his death, you could join yourself with this Savior God and achieve immortality, which sounds very much like Christianity. However, there were some very, very important differences between mystery religion. Well, two very important differences. Difference number one, the mystery religions only took the best of the best. I mean, all right, when I was in college, we had these fraternities. And Alpha Chi was one of them, and Upsilon Z was another. They had the Greek letters. And the Upsilon fraternity pride themselves that we don't take in anybody. We only take in the best. And I heard an Upsilon man say, those Chi guys, they take in people that we wouldn't even have. You know, we only take the best of the best. And they pride themselves, we have the vice president of the student council in our group. And but we have the president of the student council in our group. Well, the same way with the mystery religions, they only took the best of the people, the most successful, the richest. When Christianity came along later, they took in everybody. Christianity did not brag on who it took in. Yeah, Christianity took in the rich. I mean, they converted some members of Caesar's palace, even, and but they also took in the thief, the prostitute, the uneducated, the mentally retarded, the very, very poor, the feeble, with aged, anybody without regard to whether you were successful or not. The mystery religions did not. They only took in successful people. And by the way, of those fraternities at the college I went to, none of them took in me. I never joined. My brother did, and he spent many years afterward wondering if he ever should have. Wondering if it was the right thing for him to have done, but none of them ever invited me to join. So, now, the other thing that they had in common, I mean, that they did not have in common with Christianity, was Christianity had no mysteries. Now, the word mystery means we keep our beliefs secret. We won't tell you what we do or believe. Now, what reminds me more in today's world of mystery religion are the Masons. Some of you may know the Masons, they only take in a select group of men. And yes, it's still men only. And even the people of the women's movement don't utter a word of protest. But they only take the men and the best of men, and they keep a secret what they do. What they do behind their windowless doors is still secret. Well, Christianity, in contrast, will tell its people who want to join, well, yeah, we'll tell you what we believe, and what do you want to know? We'll tell you everything that we know about what we believe. We have no secrets. So there are two differences. Christianity took in everyone, and Christianity had no secrets. But otherwise, they had a whole lot in common. Well, as for Greece, the nation of Greece, the peninsula of Greece, was to spend the next 2,300 years, and again, I think a lot of it was due to Socrates, Plato, and so on. They spent the next 2,300 years ruled by foreigners or divided, mostly ruled by foreigners rather than divided. Who got it? Well, in 240, well, first of all, Philip of Macedon conquered them. When Philip and Alexander passed off the scene, the Romans conquered them in 243, I believe, BCE. Don't worry about the date. But the Romans conquered them. The Romans held them for about 1,000 years. Then Islam conquered them, and Islam held them for a few hundred years. They finally got their independence with the help of France and Great Britain, I believe, too. But France, they found 1802, Napoleon helped them get independence from Islam. So they were to spend the next 2,300 years until the year 1802 ruled by foreign powers. First Macedonia, then Rome, and then the Byzantine Empire, and finally the Muslims. All had them. All right. Again, what was wrong with Greece? Well, perhaps several things, but one of them is showing up really big in recent history. One of the countries that's really bringing the whole world's economy downhill is the land of Greece. And what are they doing? Trying to retire at 51, trying to take 8 weeks vacation every year, and expecting that somehow they can be a productive land, taking all this time off from work or not working, and then spending more money than they have until they've gotten so deep in debt that they can't pay it. I think some of you have heard this already. But again, the European Union is saying that the worst mistake they ever made was taking in Greece. Because now that they're part of the European Union, the rest of the union has to bail them out. All right. Anybody have any questions or comments? If not, I'm going to move on to chapter 5. I'll finish Greece a little bit. Oh, yeah. All right, wait. Rome. Like the other city-states of the ancient world, Rome is located on the banks of the Tiber River. Now, Rome is some 50 miles away from the sea. Why did they choose to build a city there? Well, several reasons, but one reason was it is believed that at this period of time there were huge, huge tidal waves. And by locating 50 miles inland, they would be free from these tidal waves, which they so far have been. No tidal wave has ever hit Rome. Also, by locating 50 miles up the river, they would keep the pirates from attacking them, because pirates are generally afraid of going up the river very far. In fact, pirates are basically cowards anyway. They will stand up to a merchant ship, but when they get a real Navy ship with some trained Marines inside the ship, the pirates will generally turn around and run unless they greatly outnumber. But again, basically cowards cannot stand up to an equal foe. But they're located on the Tiber. They're also called the City of Seven Hills. They're located on 7 hills. And it's also known as the Eternal City. The city that has survived, and they have survived some catastrophes, political more than natural disasters. Now, Rome is also located near the center of Italy's peninsula. In other words, if you look at Italy, it looks like a woman's high-heeled shoe that looks like it's kicking Sicily. But right along the center, 50 miles inland, is the city of Rome, which made it the ideal place to take over all of Italy, because again, its central location meant it was just more or less ideal to take over. And to this day, I'm talking about the year 2015, Rome is still the capital of Italy, even though it hasn't always been. And for many generations, Italy was not united. Oh yeah, by locating on 7 hills, that one was easy to defend. I mean, in those days, any army that was located on the top, number one, they could see the enemy better by looking down on them, but number two is just an advantage you have. Arrows will shoot farther when you're shooting them downhill than they will when you're trying to shoot them uphill, and they also can be aimed more accurately downhill. So slings also will go better downhill than they will uphill. Just being uphill had an advantage. So being located on 7 hills made the city easy to defend. Now, the Tiber River becomes shallow right there around Rome. It's deeper in other places, but around Rome it becomes shallow, which meant that they had an easy time building bridges or getting across it than they would have had if the river remained deep throughout. So it's located on a shallow part of the river. Now, Rome, unlike Greece debated various philosophies. The Romans were not that much interested in philosophy. They were more interested in practical. Reminds me somewhat of Confucius. They said about, how we came into existence. We don't know that, and we don't really care as long as we do the best we can while we're here. So they did not produce very many philosophers. They did not produce very many schools of philosophy. When it came to philosophy, they relied on Greece. They eventually became pretty staunch followers of Plato. But they were not interested in, you might say, in the deeper things of life. Unfortunately, they did not make a whole lot of contributions to science either. Their art, a lot of their art was a copy of Greece. A lot of their religion was a pure copy of Greek. All right. The original inhabitants of Rome were the Latins, and from that day until the day the Roman Empire ceased to exist, Latin was the official language of the Roman Empire. Now today, Latin is a dead language. When I was a kid, our teachers would try to encourage us to take Latin. They'd say, take Latin, and you'll have to run the dictionary less often because a lot of English words came from Latin. That is true. But also, at one time, doctors would write out the prescriptions in Latin, so the ordinary person could read them. So the druggists had to learn Latin. The doctors had to learn Latin. Today, we just accept the fact that, hey, let the patient read his prescription. But doctors used to communicate with each other and communicate with the druggists in Latin as recently as 50, 60 years ago. Again, this practice has largely been stopped. But a lot of your Catholic Church still conducts a lot of its ceremonies in Latin. Now, Rome's original inhabitants were Latins. Then later, the Greeks and Etruscans moved in. Well, you have your Latins first. Then you have your Etruscans and Greeks. I've mentioned how that because Greece is such a poor island as far as, a poor peninsula as far as being not productive, a lot of Greeks began to fan out, and they fanned out towards Turkey and towards Italy. And Greek culture then strongly influenced Rome, Greek art, Greek tradition. Now, as for Rome itself, according to Roman tradition, Rome was founded in 753 BCE, though I'm not going to write that date down because I'm not going to emphasize dates that much. But the Romans dated their time from, unlike the other places that dated their time from the rule of an emperor or the rule of a king, they dated their time from the 753. So they'd say in the 300th year of the empire, or in the 30th year of the empire, or rather in the 400th year of the empire. They dated from 7th, and anyway, they said it was founded by two brothers, Romulus and Remus. These were twin boys. Now, nearby, just a short drive up the road a piece to our northwest is a city called Rome. If you happen to go to Rome, you'll see a bronze statue, maybe it's made of copper or something like that. It's a metal statue of two little boys, twin boys, nursing from a she-wolf, a wolf. Have any of you seen it by any chance? The statue is still there. Yeah, it's based on this myth. According to the story, Romulus and Remus were twin boys whom their parents decided didn't want to raise up, so they took them out in the elements and exposed them. These boys were found by a she-wolf who reared them up. Now, folks, this part of the story is somewhat plausible because there's been at least 20-some cases of children who were reared up for several in their infancy by wolves. It is known that wolves will sometimes take in a human baby and nurse it. In American folklore, Pecos Bill was dropped out of the wagon accident by his parents as his parents moved west, and the wolf found him and reared him up as a wolf. But he had a certain mark on him. When his older brother saw him, now, hey, you're our long-lost Pecos, our long-lost Bill. This is in American folklore, but in Roman folklore, Romulus and Remus were reared up by two wolves, and they grew up, and they got in a fight when they were grown, and Romulus killed Remus. Romulus then went on to marry, and his descendants became the Romans, and he founded the city of Rome, or he founded the city of Rome, and Rome went on to eventually become a great empire. Now, a lot of what we know about the original history of the Romans is stories that, again, we call fantastic. And I'm making no apologies for this. All the ancient people began our history with stories today we look on as being fantastic, far out, with a lot of supernatural elements involved. We skip over them. But the tradition says that Rome was ruled originally, though, by 7 kings at first. King one after another. And these 7 kings each ruled for a good many years, and all told these kings ruled about 200 years. Now, in the late 1700s, a historian named Gibbon said, I don't believe these 7 kings existed, and he threw them out of his history. Your book more or less does the same thing, except your book does say that we do know now the last 3 of them did exist. What was Gibbon's motive? Okay, I'll tell you what Gibbon's motive was. It was to question all the ancient stories, of course, including the Bible. He believed that you could, so basically he was trying to throw a monkey wrench into a lot of ancient history, saying that we just simply cannot believe what the ancients told us, and this skepticism persists to this day. But we have since, like I said, found out that the last of these 3 kings did exist. They had Etruscan names, and eventually Rome rebelled against its last king, overthrew its last king, and set up a republican form of government. Something similar to democracy. All right. Now, a lot of what we know about this period was written by a historian named Livy. And a problem we have is that a lot of it's not believed today. Your book once had a story of Cincinnatus, of whom the city of Cincinnati is named after. I have relatives who live close to Cincinnati. But anyway, the story, I won't go into the story of Cincinnatus because, again, he's not in the book anymore. But the story of Cincinnatus is generally not taken as serious history today. Then there's the story about Horatius and a bridge that the enemy was attacking and somebody had to destroy the bridge. But there was the people who were destroying the bridge. The bridge was so well built it would take a team of men to destroy the bridge. But somebody had to guard the men who were destroying the bridge. So Horatius decided I'll guard him. So Horatius stood all by himself against the enemy and kept on fighting while behind him his buddies were destroying the bridge. Then when the bridge was destroyed, of course, Horatius did not get across. So Horatius still kept fighting until finally he was mortally wounded, couldn't fight anymore, and he backed up to where he fell into the river himself and died and drowned. But again, this extreme bravery is called into question at this time. Almost unbelievable, but nevertheless possible. Now, there were some reverses Rome suffered during this early period of its history. It is known the Celts. These Celts are mystery people. And folk, well, some people actually believe the Celts were a race of giants, titans type. Believe what you will, but the Celts came in and they sacked Rome. About 400 or so years before Christ, 400 BCE, the Celts sacked Rome, but however, Rome was able to rebuild and recover. Again, sometimes the best thing that can happen to a city is for some enemy to come in and burn it down, because then the city is rebuilt better than it was before, and in a lot of cases this is true. It was to be 800 more years before Rome was to be sacked again. When the Celts sacked it in 400 BCE, in 410 the Vandals sacked Rome, 800 years later. All right. Now, Rome was right in the middle of Italy, or pretty close to the middle. That meant it was surrounded on all sides by enemies, similar to what the Assyrians had been hundreds of years before. You can do either one of two things when you're in that condition. You can either build yourself up and conquer your enemies, or you can succumb to them. In the case of Rome, they conquered them. Essentially, the way it happened, Rome didn't plan this. They defeated one of their enemies. Then, instead of enslaving them, they went to their enemies, they would just say, hey, be our ally. The two of us and you can join. We'll give you our sons to marry your daughters, and in turn your sons can marry our daughters. We'll build a road between our city and your city, and roads even then were important because they had the carts and they could carry a bigger load. We'll build a road between our city, and we promise if your city is invaded, we'll come into your aid, and if our city is invaded, you can come to our aid. Become one of us. They got that city on their side. Then they conquered another city and built it. To make a long story short, they started building roads to the city they conquered. And after a while, there came a saying that was to last for hundreds of years: all roads lead to Rome. Because the Romans had started out building roads to the various cities in Italy. But they conquered the city-states one at a time and convinced them to become their ally. Now this worked only as long as they were conquering people who spoke their language and worshiped their gods. Now later they were to run into an enemy who they could not placate, could not conquer, a couple of them. Actually, they ran into three enemies they could not placate: Carthage, the Jews, and the Britons, the British. The British continually rebelled against them. Carthage rebelled against them. But in Italy, they eventually, to make a long story short, they conquered all of Italy. And the city-states began to admire Rome and wish for the success of Rome, because they learned as Rome grew, they did too. So keep this in mind. You start hating the rich people, I say let the rich get richer, because the richer they get, the richer you will get. The richer the rich get, the richer I'll get. Start taking money from the rich to redistribute it, and we all go poor together. So let the rich get richer. And the same way with Rome. Let the Romans get more powerful. And as they do, you will too. All right. We'll take up with there next week how that Rome functioned in a republic. Now, let us think this. I've got a minute or two yet. I mean, that clock's fast, folks. So don't. There have been historians who have compared Rome to the United States. The United States once had a king. King George III was the last one who rebelled against him. The Romans rebelled against their king and set up the United States of democracy. Rome's still democracy. Rome had a government called a Senate. Governing body called a Senate. We have a Senate. Rome gave certain of its government officials veto power. We give our governors and presidents veto power. But the Roman Republic came to an end. It failed. And eventually the Roman Empire came to an end. It failed. Oh yes, the Romans began to build the dome. That was one of the big contributions to art, the dome. We have a dome on almost every capital in this country. The state of Georgia has a big gold-covered dome. The United States Capitol is a dome, copying the Romans. And if you visit Washington, D.C., you'll see a whole lot of Roman gods, statues in our nation's capital, in what's supposedly a Christian country. Many of you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Any of you been to Washington? A couple of you. You'll see statues to Neptune, to Jupiter, Zeus, call it what you will. They have a lot of them there. And again, the Capitol Dome, the Romans had a capital, they had a Senate, they rebelled against their king. Their democracy was destined, like all democracies have been, to not last. Again, owing to the tendency of a democracy to become excessively liberal, free, you might say, to where a charismatic ruler can take over. All right, everybody have a good weekend, and I'll